Welcome to Story in a Bottle. I'm your host, Dan McEnroe. Each episode, our guests are leading voices in tech, media, and entertainment. And to get to know them better, we share their favorite cocktails as they share their stories.
We all know that stories of overnight success are rarely accurate, that it takes years for true success to come to fruition. That's exactly what happened to Mike Wystrach. Over a pint of Guinness, Mike talks about growing up around the restaurant business and how that led him into some of the darkest days in his career. Luckily, it also ultimately inspired him to found the food delivery company Freshly, a venture that eventually changed his life when it exited to Nestlé. Today, he's tackling another challenge with Petfolk, where he's revolutionizing veterinary care.
The way I always love to start these conversations is to talk about what we're drinking, since we are here at a bar. You chose Guinness. You said you're not a whiskey guy, which I totally get. Why Guinness?
Well, it's close to St. Patty's Day, so this is kind of a few days after St. Patty's Day, in an Irish kind of setting here, so kind of made sense. I'm a big Guinness fan. It's a great afternoon drink. I like beer, occasionally vodka, and I love wine, but wine's kind of evening for me, so it's definitely
As much as I like the wine here, I'd say you made a good choice.
Yeah.
I'm a wine person myself, but
Can't go wrong with the Guinness. Yeah.
I'm glad we're drinking Guinness. We'll keep it nice and tame
Yes.
on a Wednesday afternoon.
Yes, we will.
Because it's very probable that we'll go through two. Just so you know.
I have no problem with that either.
Good to know. Well, one of the things we do in this show, we talk to people about their lives, and I think it's always interesting to kind of understand how people got where they are. But I'm very fascinated with your current company because it seems like a departure from some of the stuff you've done in the past, and it's something that really is kind of needed. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you kind of figured out what your next move was going to be to come into this, and why pets and why animals are so important?
Yeah, I think one of the keys to my success has always been kind of scratching my own itch. So I try to solve problems I have, and then build companies off that. So it usually starts with, my founder stories truly are they're not made up after the fact founder stories. So on this one, grew up in a ranch in Southern Arizona, youngest of 6. My second oldest sister is a vet. She's been a vet for 29 years. I got a puppy here in New York. I was a Bernese Mountain Dog. I hadn't had a puppy for a long time, so probably 7-8 years, and my last puppy was in Arizona. And I was kind of blown away with how complicated it was. New York, generally, I'd say most things in New York are easier than anywhere else in the world. It's a town where convenience is highly optimized. People really, and it just seemed like insane that the veterinary experience here in New York was so broken. So I ended up, my sister was in Texas at the time. I was spending half my time on any veterinary calls, talking with her and having her coordinate. And a lot of our conversations came to I can't believe veterinary medicine is this dated. The vision of the company we've ultimately built, which is Petfolk, is really my sister's vision of the future of what veterinary medicine is. When she explained her vision as a N of 1, a consumer, I was like, yes, that's what I want. Which really was this idea of connected care. It's modernization of pet care for today's pet parent, which is kind of, it's not like advanced kind of like we've reinvented it. It's really taking things that you see in general consumer facing businesses and bringing it to veterinary medicine. So as simple as having apps that help you manage your pet, being able to book online, having 24/7 virtual care with a doctor that's available. So this was certainly a deviation from my previous companies. And I don't claim to even have remote domain expertise in this. Really, what I've always found is I like to be. There's an old Hair Club for Men commercial where the guy says,
Cy Sterling.
I'm not only the president, I'm the first customer, and
Sure.
I generally look at myself as the CEO who's the first customer. Usually not. Even in my last company prior to this, I wasn't the domain expert. I wasn't the expert on things. I'm a quick learner. That has definitely helped me, and I generally can learn complex things fairly quickly. But veterinary, I'm nowhere near a vet. But so for me, it's been really unlocking my sister's vision in this case, and doing it in a way that I, the consumer, would really like it. It's worked really well so far.
Well, so let's go back to your dog. You get a dog. You're in New York City, or you're in Long Island at the time?
Yeah, New York City. So
you have, obviously having a dog in New York is already its own challenge.
Yes.
Yeah. what was that what was that experience like for you? So you get a dog, you hadn't had one in a long time, and what happens?
Well, so I think the challenge I found is that generally I wasn't a first time pet parent, but I was a second time puppy owner, but it had been a long time. And really you kind of need coaching. You need to understand like, hey, what's next? You needed, to lack of better words, you'd ideally like a concierge, someone kind of guiding you through this. Here in New York, it was very much like a really kind of uncomfortable, or uneducation system in how to book a veterinary appointment. So you had to find a vet. You didn't know what was right or wrong. The vets, you had to call and book online. When you called and book online, it was very unclear of like, what's the next step.
We had to call and book on the phone or on what do you mean?
I'm sorry, call and book on the phone.
Okay.
So there was no online booking. There was no kind of clarity of like, what am I expecting in that first appointment? What am I expecting for kind of the best in class kind of wellness to provide my puppy?
And what is the goal, by the way? I haven't owned a dog since I was a kid. My wife keeps telling me we're going to get a dog, so this is actually helpful for me. But like, what do you call when you first of all, when you're doing this, how do you, no pun intended, vet the vet? And then what are you looking for in that first conversation?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, what you want to do is provide access to information early, understanding. That's, again, not rocket science here. It's providing information on the website, providing blog posts, providing expectations and understanding of what do we at Petfolk or in the veterinary world generally view as like best in class. What should you be thinking of doing for your puppy, or even if it's an older dog, right? So it starts there with kind of an education process. Then what we really pride ourselves on is putting together a plan for you. Now that plan is usually generalized based upon your dog, your breed, but it's also customized based on what you want. So it's really thinking through, okay, what does your vaccine schedule look like? That's kind of the basics. How do we think about your exam schedule? How do we think about things like dental and things like that? How do we think about nutrition? How do we think about the whole breed? Again, no different than humans, right? You go to a doctor and your doctor really helps put you on a program and a plan to say, okay, you want to be in great health and shape. Here's what we need you to do, right? So,
but I think that's a thing that doesn't happen very often, because you have to know, like most people, let's say, I'm guessing we're both in our like 40s, right?
Yes.
Okay. So most guys in their 40s, first of all, don't want to go to the doctor.
Yeah.
Second of all, if they go to the doctor, they're going to do their yearly, and unless something drastic needs to happen, they're probably not going to do much else. So I think about this like, and I know we're talking about pets, and I don't mean that glibly. I mean, like, I know we're talking about pets, but for people or pets, I think the idea of getting on a plan is a bit more, is a bit challenging, right? So when you think about your dog before Petfolk existed, you get to this point where like you need to find a vet. And was this an emergency, or was it, I have a dog now, I should get the shot?
I have a dog. So I mean, there's kind of generally, when we think about like you become a pet parent. So very similar to, again, I think there's a ton of analogs to human health, but I think there's kind of two tracks, right? So there's the one track of like, you have a baby, you're going to have a pediatrician. Mm-hmm. Very few people have babies and don't get a pediatrician. And the pediatrician very quickly puts you on a program. So there's a vaccine program. There's how often do you come in? Now, similar to a puppy, when you're a young puppy, you're seeing that puppy fairly often to make sure everything's okay, right? So those, again, very similar to human health. The development years, the first year of a puppy, just like a kid, there's a lot that's going on. So you want to kind of make sure that you're on that. Yeah. Now, most parents kind of are very close to pediatricians. They do a great job on that. Puppy owners or kitten owners are generally the same in that if you're a first-time owner, you kind of get walked through that. So that's one use case. Generally, there's not great information. It's not as well done, and it's not as well systemized and programmed into the veterinary world to really make sure that gets done in a way that's very convenient and organized for the pet parent. Now, Then there's other cases where like you're a 40-something-year-old man. Your use case of when you go to the doctor are usually based on some kind of need, right? So it could be an annual exam. It could be just general things like that. But likely it's because, I'm not feeling good or something like that. So we call those more acute kind of urgent. So same thing with pets. But usually, just like with humans, it's usually like, okay, we can treat the cause, we can treat the thing, but usually there's something else that we need to investigate and understand, right?
Yeah.
And so what a lot of this kind of comes back to, and you see this now a lot more in human health for sure, is most things can be prevented by doing other things that you're not going to necessarily do in there. So it means like, are you eating properly? Are we seeing your pet regularly? Are we getting annual lab work? Because if we are, we can understand what is changing. So, and again, no different than a human doctor, where if you came in, they'd be like, let's get annual lab work.
Yeah.
Because we can track your kidney function, we can track your liver function, we can track your cholesterol. And then over time, what we could see is it getting worse? Is it staying the same? Is it getting better? So very similar. What we just generally see in veterinary medicine is that and even in human health, where you don't always have a very dialed in program, it's just not super dialed in for the pet parent. So we think there's an opportunity in really making it convenient and easy for the pet parent. So the pet parent can get educated along the process, but they don't have to be the expert who's driving the quality of health, right? What you really want is your doctor to help you drive the quality of health for your pet, and or your person, right? You don't want to have to drive your doctor on like, here's what I need you to do to make me healthy. You want your doctor to say like, here's what you want. Here's how we're going to get you there.
Gotcha. So if I'm a new pet owner and I go to Petfolk, are you guys going to connect me with a doctor, a vet that's either near me or right for me, or do I find, is it like ZocDoc where I find kind of the vet that matches my needs? Or?
So all of our pet parents are coming to us. We own all of our own practices. You're going to meet with one of our doctors. We have a general kind of what we'd say a standardized system of care or standardized kind of medical philosophy across our practices. So you're going to get the Petfolk way across all of our locations. You can, ultimately choose to have that same vet if you want, or it's interchangeable. So I think the closest human analog is kind of One Medical, where you a member of One Medical, you have a doctor, you can see that doctor, but if you also want to see someone else because that doctor's unavailable, you can do that. On that, what we're going to do is you got a puppy, we're going to put you on kind of a program. Now, you get to choose how much, just like in human health or anything, how much of that program you want to follow. But we're going to educate you on why these things are important on the process, right? Why these vaccine programs are important, why we need to see, if it's a puppy, why we need to see these exams, why we need to do lab work young, because we can really monitor. So, and what we want to do is use technology that is going to make that really convenient and easy for you. So we want those being uploaded to your app. We want you to be able to follow a wellness checklist. We want you to always have your vaccines and your rabies right on you. So if you ever go to a dog shelter and they say, okay, or doggy hotel, not a dog shelter, and they say, okay, well, we need to see your vaccines. You're like, yeah, they're right here, right? Like versus, kind of calling your vet and trying to get them to send them over. So again, the big thing is how do we make it easy to be a pet owner? And that's really what we want, is we want to deliver first and foremost best-in-class medicine to our pets. But we also want to make that easy for the pet parent.
So when you think about when you have this problem, your sister's a vet, you're like, I want to, you see the opportunity. You're like, man, this is a hole in the experience I'm having as a dog owner. Now, obviously you started companies before, so you're not like a first time founder, but how do you go about saying, okay, now that I have this idea, which is in the medical space, which I mean, I don't know how different the medical space for animals is than for humans from an FDA standpoint, from a HIPAA standpoint, but I've worked on a lot of med tech stuff. I know how complicated that can be. So how do you go about that to start something like that? Where do you start? Like, what's your first move?
Well, I mean, so this one was a little different because this one was really my sister's passion. And for me, it was saying to her, you should do this, and I'll back you and support you. And her passion to say, I want to do this. Right. So I think whenever you found success in any startup and is really, you have to have a passion by the principal founder. And Audrey was the principal founder. Now, this was my second startup. So I had a lot of unlocks that were very available, whether it's, access to capital, whether it's understanding systems process, access to network of potential employees or consultants. So I was really able to help accelerate her. It was really her passion. So in this one, I was coming in first and foremost kind of as an investor and a backer. Later, as we built and scaled, I realized that I could really add a lot of value from an operational standpoint.
Because you know how to scale a company.
I know how to scale a company. And I think there's, I call myself the widget guy. And, companies are more similar than they are different, even if what they do is very different.
Sure.
There's a lot of things on process, people, technology, implementation, finance, bookkeeping, all those things that kind of doesn't matter what you're selling or what you're doing. They're relatively safe. So I generally am our widget guy. I do all the things except the things that actually matter, which is taking care of pets and those things. So, and we're really good, I think, from a synergistic standpoint with me and my sister, is that, we both have our core competencies and our skills. They're very different. We have a tremendous amount of respect for where someone else is really strong. And because they're so different, our Venn diagram is the overlap is very small. So we can kind of do our own thing, operate very well with each other. But yeah, this was really an unlock, for me, this was unlocking a vision that I saw, articulated to me that I was like, this needs to exist in the world. I always have fun on things that I think like, why does this not exist? Like, why does this not exist? And those are always the funnest things for me to create and build and do, because like, you're kind of like, again, scratching your own itch. Like you're building the product you want to see exist in the world. And there's nothing funner than that.
No, totally. I mean, look, I share that philosophy as someone who I'm always helping companies with how do they focus, how do they launch, whatever the industry is. And we've done construction and entertainment and nonprofit and fintech, and that doesn't matter. I always think about it like, what can I bring to the table here to complement, whatever the founder has? And the founder generally is the expert, right? And like your sister. So what I wonder is like, so your sister's never had a startup, but is a wonderful vet. What do you tell her? Like when she says, we're going to do this, you're like, great, love this idea. If she says, how do we do this? What do you say to her?
So I think, and it's generally, whether it's my sister or anyone else saying, is like, the first thing is to jump, right? I think that's like, there's no magic, like I can give you the roadmap on whatever you're doing. The first thing is you got to jump. You got to make a decision. It's binary. You got to jump and get all in. Pulling, as long as you keep kind of a safety net, it's likely not going to work. You got to just go all in and figure it out. You got to set artificial deadlines. So like, our thing, which was easy, is we got to open our first clinic, right? We got to open our first practice.
That's what I'm looking at. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You just gotta set the boundary. Now, the question is when? Well, like when's the soonest we can do it? And let's push that. Now,
where also, in this case, physical space, right?
So we had the opportunity, I think, on this as we thought through, is like this was a physical space. We were originally going to do New York. We were, hindsight, very fortunate that we were hitting a lot of stumbling. This is pre-COVID, and we were hitting a lot of stumbling just because the real estate market in New York was firing. Like retail was like peak New York, right? 2019, like peak New York, and we weren't able to find anything. And so we kind of stepped back and we said, well, like, why New York? And we were like, I don't know, because we kind of thought New York. But then when we really thought about it, we were like, well, we have the whole US. Audrey was willing. She was, again, I think this is the key of any founder, is like, are you willing to go all the way? And Audrey, that's like, like my passion behind her was really like, I'll move anywhere. Let's choose the best place. And so we did a broader search of where people were moving. Now, this is pre-COVID, but the Southeast was really where people were already moving pre-COVID. Now, this was obviously very much accelerated through the COVID trends. Sure. But we chose Charlotte. It was a secondary market. So we wanted to start not a primary market. So primary market would be New York, Miami, kind of Dallas. And it had great growth demographics. Now, later we kind of chose Charlotte. COVID happened. That kind of put everything on shutdown for 6 months. Came out, we had a place. It was actually very beneficial for us because the world was kind of in a bit of like, what's going on? We were able to get some really good leases. And we went from there. And it was kind of like, on all these things is you don't really know on your first, whatever you're doing, you don't really know. You just kind of got to go. And, for us, it was really fortunate because Audrey had 30 years experience. So, we weren't winging it. She knew what was going to work. She knew she had a very strong vision. Her vision had been, tried, proven, not in the exact format that we ultimately went with, but in enough that she knew exactly what we needed to do. We've refined on that.
What does that Charlotte MVP look like then? Obviously MVPs are great because you're learning, right? Nothing's perfect, right? Yeah. You're just trying to put the thesis out there to see if it works. What was the MVP for you guys?
For us, it ended up being a 1,600 square foot location, which is a little small. We realized, we're now, that's our smallest location. It's scaled exceptionally good where we put it. It's a great location for us. It's scaled really well. We learned a lot in that. Part of it was we originally started off at one vet. We changed the name and did a bunch of stuff on that iteration. I think what you realize on these is like, you're going to get, if you're lucky, you're going to get 51% right. And then the other 49% you're going to have to figure out, right? And the goal is, as you get to do the second one, or, as you kind of look for scale, is that you get closer to that 80%. I think if I ever say we're at 100%, like, I'm lying to you, because like, we're never going to get to where everything's figured out. If we do, either I'm lying to you or I'm going to get fired. Like that's at the end of the day, is like, our job is to figure out how to constantly, continuously improve. I think what we did on that one is we immediately proved that the concept, like what you see is kind of takeoff velocity. And we immediately proved that the concept resonated with consumers. We immediately proved that, our NPS sits at 93, which is unheard of. Like an NPS, Net Promoter Score, Apple's usually seen as best in class at 83. So 93 is like unheard of.
What does that mean to people who don't know what that is?
So Net Promoter Score is basically, I ask you a question of between 1 to 10, 1 being low, 10 being high. How likely are you to refer this product to a friend, right? And it's a very punitive thing that you only get credit for a 10 and a 9. An 8, 7, and 6 are viewed as passive. So you get 0 points for that. And then anything below a 6 is viewed as a -1. So when you look at 93, that means 93% of so again, it's a 1 offset on this. So it means that more than probably 97% of our customers are rating us in that 10 or 9. So
wow.
when you look at that, it really is exemplifying the quality of the product, but also the gap. Part of NPS is the difference between what you expect and what you receive, right? So food is a really hard NPS, right? Because people have all sorts of expectations, right? So the problem with food, my previous company, is that like, if I give you a meal that's $10 and I say, rank this meal about like how likely are you to refer this meal, you may be thinking about the meal that you just spent $150 and you'd be like, well, compared to the meal that I spent $150, this is okay. Well, that's not really a fair comparison, right? So it all starts from expectations, understanding. So what this partly shows is, one, we do a great job and we feel that, but it partly shows that the expectations of the pet parent walking through the door are extraordinarily low. Mm-hmm. So our ability to wow that pet parent is massive. So we nailed that right from day one. And that was kind of the biggest signal for me is if you generally are building a product that the customer loves, you can get a lot of things right. That's just the one thing that you can't get wrong. So that was enough for us to say, like, let's go and let's figure this out. We just opened our 14th location in a little less than 2 years.
How many states are you in?
We're in North Carolina, South Carolina, Atlanta or Georgia, Florida, and Texas. So 5 states. Continue to scale. We'll be close to 30 by the end of the year. So we're now kind of in that full, like, let's go, skip on. I'd say it took us, almost 6 months to a year before we felt like we were ready to like really hit the gas on the next one.
Yeah.
But now we're there, and now we're kind of full steam ahead.
As you guys have started to scale, what worked best for you guys, and what did you ditch?
What worked best? Well, we ditched the name. That was a big one.
It wasn't called Petfolk first.
It was called One Vet first.
I think I saw the deck when it was called One Vet. Yeah.
So we originally called it One Vet. That didn't work. It worked, but we just felt like it was too close to One Medical. Yeah. We felt like it wasn't going to scale.
Sure.
We felt like we really wanted to be differentiated. We wanted to build a brand that was unique to us. So, that was a big thing. Not like relative to like all the things we've done. It wasn't that, but it felt like a big thing at the time. I think a few other things that worked really well is just understanding, like, defining our culture, defining who we are. I think part of that is really leaning on the founder and making sure that we capture that right, and then hiring around them from a culture fit status standpoint. But nothing that I felt like, I don't think anything that we launched virtual care about 8 months after we opened. So that was a big thing. We always knew we were going to do that. It just took longer to build virtual care than it actually took. It was easier for us to open a location than it was to get that virtual care open. But
yeah,
ultimately that was a big lift for us.
So I think a lot about what you're talking about when it comes to culture, and it comes to, it's funny you mentioned like the cost and how you equate that to the food business. I know that, like, if we go back a little bit, you grew up in Arizona, right? Like, your parents were restaurateurs, yeah, right? And ranch as well?
Ranching, yeah, restaurateurs, yeah. Hotel, gas stations.
I didn't know the hotel and the gas station part. Mark didn't mention this. So when you're growing up in Arizona, around this stuff, how much are you involved, whether it be as an observer, as a reluctant worker, or maybe not reluctant worker, in any of those situations?
I mean, I think, the benefit for us is growing up in a truly small business entrepreneur family, was there was no escaping it, right? So everything my parents did was some degree of entrepreneurship, whether it was the ranch, restaurants, hotels, gas stations. And there was no escaping it from, like, it was the topic of conversation on everything. It was expected for us. So I was never asked to work in the restaurant. I was told to work in the restaurant. It was expected. The minute we can start carrying things, we went out and worked on the ranch, and we were up at 5 a.m. doing stuff there. So I think you see that in most small business families, right? Where it's how the bills are paid, right? And so I think now there was goods and bads surely to that. I think what the goods were is that we got to learn very early about like work ethic. We got to learn very early about how businesses worked, how those things. I'd say most was through osmosis. Like I can't, I'm sure it happened, but I don't remember too many times where my parents sat me down and said, "Here's how this works." I remember my parents just saying, "Do this," and then kind of had to figure out on the job training, right? So
Sure.
but it teaches you a high degree of like you figure things out. You realize. So I think our entire family was really born around that.
Did it like growing up when you, so I mean, I started working at restaurants when I was about 15, I think. But it wasn't, and I was going to say it wasn't a family thing. That's not true. My stepfather worked there at this deli, and he got me a job, and we sometimes worked together, but it was family owned business. And so it was a brother and a sister. And I remember very much like the dynamics of that. Did you guys all feel like you were in it together, or was there a bit of a, oh my God, I can't believe I have to do this, because you're a kid and you want to do kid things and whatever too?
I mean, I think it was definitely, my family's very close. So I think we definitely had to feel we were all in it. I don't think, it's probably different time, different generation. I don't think there was the kids didn't have a POV on this, right? You weren't asked like, "Hey, are you guys okay with this?" It was like, it was expected. And I think, my parents were extraordinarily generous in everything they did for us. But and me and Mark, me and my twin brother were the youngest. So I think part of it was the expectation. So you'd have to ask my older sisters who probably, we kind of followed their lead and they were already doing these things. So I think from our standpoint, it wasn't like, it was just expected.
Yeah.
Right. So my parents never asked us, "Would you get up and feed the animals?" It was told you're going to get up and feed the animals.
Yeah.
And we never debated it, but probably because we had great role models in front of us. The restaurant was just always there, right? Like I think the restaurants, I mean, you certainly as a bar owner know that like they just are constantly there. There's constantly something going on. There's constantly, and so the path of least resistance as a business owner is usually so the dishwasher doesn't show up. Oh, well, this 10-year-old can wash dishes.
Right.
Now, the first time you go and you wash dishes at 10, you're like, "This is great, right? I gotta watch dishes."
Is it? I don't know. I felt that way.
We felt it was like, it was like, because we finally were in there and you make $50. You're like, "Oh my God." At that time, it probably wasn't even 50. It was probably 20, 30.
Making money on doing something. Yeah, that's true. As
And
opposed to doing it for free.
Yeah. And then you realize, and my parents, I think we were, they always believed in the power of earning was like that. You saw that. Now we were always paid significantly below what, like whatever minimum wage was.
Right.
When we ultimately started busing and waiting, we got paid our tips, but we didn't get paid actually salaries. So it was a win-win, but I think like, with that said, like my parents paid for everything. I was fortunate that I left college with no, zero debt. I was completely afforded an amazing college experience. I went to private high school. So like, it wasn't poor me. Oh my God. And like my parents net were losers on the trade.
Right,
so,
right.
but I think that was kind of the expectations. We went to college. My parents paid for absolutely everything. We like literally off everything. We worked every weekend. And it wasn't, again, it was a great trade, because we got to keep all of our tips and they got a little free labor, but they were certainly paying it on the other end.
Sure. Well, when you're growing up, and I asked this like a lot of entrepreneurs, because clearly you have it like in your blood that you want to start things. You've started other things beyond just Petfolk and Freshly. When you're a kid or high school or college, are you already in that entrepreneurial spirit, or are you still kind of figuring it out? And
I think the biggest thing people always ask me is like, because my family is very entrepreneurial in many different aspects.
Sure.
But I think where my parents gave us is a lack of fear for failure. And I think when you look at me and Mark, we now look like successes. If you looked at us when we were 33, you'd be a little concerned, right? Like we didn't look like successes. We'd had multiple failures. I think what my parents just is really believed is like hard work, getting things done, and the good things will come. And I think my parents didn't put a lot of stress on it. My parents had a lot of ups, but they also had a lot of downs. So I think we were fortunate to, in hindsight, I wouldn't necessarily say at the time we felt that we were fortunate, but in hindsight, to be part of those failures, to be part of the challenges, to realize that life doesn't end, to realize that like
sure.
you can get through those things. And it, I think what I always say to people is like, failure is something you learn to deal with. It's actually is one of those things that it's, until you face it, you don't know how to deal with it. But the more you face it, the more the more it rolls off your back. So I think, and that's what entrepreneurship is about. It's constant failures. It's constantly like, and now to the degree of a failure, at the end of the day, if you make it work, it's great. But like, that's Mark went into music, you went into acting, which is the same thing. It's rejection. Failure is another rejection,
every day.
So it's just the point of being like, okay, I've asked people for money to back my idea. They say no, 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 no. Finally get a yes, right? And then we got the idea going. The idea doesn't work perfectly. So I think it's just that constant rigor to say I'm not quitting, right? It's that hard work.
But what I'm wondering is more like, when did the ideas start? And I'll give you an example. So I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur, and I often like cringe at that label because I think of myself as me, and I'm sure you think of yourself as you. You don't walk around going like, I'm an entrepreneur. And I'm just curious, like for you, like what's the thing? You're like the first idea you had. You're like, I'm gonna start doing something. And maybe it was a big idea. I don't know.
I think the first thing I think I did solo was the restaurant.
This is after college?
This was after college. I did investment banking. So I didn't actually, I don't think I had my brother was actually much more, had the entrepreneur.
Well, let's talk about, let's hold off on the restaurant for a second, because I do want to talk about, you're in this wonderful, situation. You're in this familial situation. So I hope it's wonderful. Where you're working at a restaurant, you go to college, you're at University of Arizona, right? And finance is what you studied?
Finance.
Is that something that you were like passionate about?
Yeah, no, I mean, my parents were very hands-off parents. My parents didn't like, me and my brother applied for colleges we automatic admission in U of A and ASU. So we applied one day before. My parents never, like if we didn't apply, my parents wouldn't know. My parents had very little concern on what we did. We've always been kind of self-motivators. I, from a very young age, wanted to be an investment banker. I don't know why. It stuck with me. No one in my family's investment bankers.
Wall Street, and you were like, yes.
I clearly watched something. It stuck with me. I started reading the Wall Street Journal when I was 13 years old. I've had a subscription since I'm 16. I don't know why. I really don't. I was fascinated by finance. And that was always my track.
So, okay. So you go to college, you go to study finance. You're like, my goal is to be an investment banker. And the dream happens. You leave college, you become an investment banker, correct?
I did. Here's how. Then I was like, I love this story because I just think about reality is more about persistence than perception. And I think I came out of U of A, which is not the most recruited investment banking school. U of A is good for a lot of things, but investment banking is not.
Sure.
So I really wanted in this. I don't know why I wanted this. I came out right at the end of the internet bubble. So this is going to date me, but I graduated in 2002. The internet bubble just crashed.
Oh yeah, you just missed it.
Investment bankers were not hiring. So I got a few interviews. They were really more friends, like just paying favors, and they interviewed me just to check a box. However, I got their emails and I got their phone numbers. This is before people necessarily email a lot. Phone numbers were the key. And I got this one guy who I was ignorant enough to not know his role, where he was actually the head of investment research at this bank called Thomas Weisel Partners. So he actually had a very, very senior role. I was too ignorant to know how important he was. And so I called him every week. On the same time. And I said, do you have a job opening? And I would go through his assistant. I'd spend a lot of time with his assistant to where I'd get through and I'd say, his name's Perry Boyle. And I'd say, is Mr. Boyle available? And she'd say, hey, Mr. Boyle's busy. And then, so I got to know her. And then I'd say, would you please pass on that to this? So for almost a year and a half, finally he picks up the phone. And most of the times he didn't. I would talk to him occasionally. And he goes, I got you an interview in New York. It's in 2 days. Show up. Don't ever call me again.
So at his company.
Yeah. At his company. He got me an interview. And it was in New York and I was living in LA. I had no plans to move to New York, but this was an opportunity. I flew to New York. I ended up getting the job. I moved 2 weeks later because they said, yeah, if you want the job, you have to move in 2 weeks. So I had to scramble. I moved. I slept on a buddy's couch.
But you got the job, first of all.
I got the job. I slept on the guy's couch. And then Perry later came up to me and said, I always use you as an example of the power of persistence. And
what was the job, by the way?
It was a sales and trading. It was on a sales desk. It was a junior associate on a sales desk, equity sales. Loved it. Got to work closely with our traders, closely with the investment research team. I learned a lot. I was I just was a sponge. I just would spend time with people. I just get no stuff. Yeah, and I ended up having kind of great relationships, and also realized, and as you sometimes do, is that the dream that I thought I had and the dream that I thought was what I wanted to do was work for an investment bank and figure my way out through there was really not what I wanted to do.
Well, let's talk about that part of it, because let's talk about the expectations of it, because there is I think a perception, if you will, or a stereotype of what the world of investment banking looks like. So for you wanting to go into it, what was the perception?
Well, I think the perception was you get to make a lot of money. That's, I think, quintessentially anyone who says they went into investment banking because of saying outside of like, you can make a lot of money and do this. I think also it's a very interesting job. And there is no doubt it is an extraordinarily interesting job across all those things. It's long hours, it's hardworking, it's being with a lot of alphas. Generally, those are all things that sometimes can scare people, but they're things that excite me. It's being with the best. It's kind of, if you're an athlete, you want to play with the best athletes, and investment banks are that.
American Psycho wasn't wrong.
It is not. Now you get
the psycho part.
You get color for characters, but you get color for characters in anything. I think at the end of the day, it is an exceptionally smart people who are measured every single day on their performance. So there is no BS, right? If you look at a sales and training floor, you are measured every single day. You know what your book is. You know what your returns are. There's no hiding. There's no BS on that. So I think people who like that, people who gravitate towards absolute intellectual honesty, really like that. Now, the investment banking side is a little different. It's a little longer sales cycle, but again, it's still exceptionally smart people. Back when I joined, it's changed a little bit, but the hours were relentless. Now, what you ultimately get is it's kind of like boot camp or anything else, right? Where everyone always tells you, I would never do it again, but it's the greatest part of my life, right?
Yeah.
Because you end up learning. Now, I wasn't on the actual investment banking side, but our hours were similar. The expectations were, 12 to 14 to 15 hour days. You just got to get the work done. And I think those were great things. I love that. What I ultimately hated was working in a corporation. So all of these are corporations. What I've always prided myself on is I don't see myself as an entrepreneur. I see myself as an operator. Yeah. I am a really good operator. And what I mean by operator is I am exceptionally good at process and efficiencies and driving things forward. And I'm very, very, I look at something that doesn't make sense and I fix it. And I am relentless on fixing it. And I'm a bulldog on that. That's what I've always been good at. I've never been good at I want to build this. I'm always like, this is a problem. I want to fix it. Inside a big corporation, that will drive you nuts and it'll drive everyone around you nuts.
So much process, so many red tape, so much,
so,
whatever.
I mean, I laugh now because I'm this 24, 25-year-old kid telling all my bosses how to run the business. Now, I still think I was right on a lot of the things, but the hubris that I had, now it drove me nuts that just stupid things like our seating charts made no sense and these things. But you realize over time, and now that I look back, I'm like, here's this 25-year-old kid. Seating generally in an office is a no-touch, no-win situation. Telling a boss this doesn't make sense. But one of the things I realized is I can't work for inefficient systems. I just can't. It just drives without the ability to try to change it. And that's why I was like, I'll never do this again. I'll never work for a corporation again.
Well, I think that it's a personality type, right? I think we might share this a little bit because when I was in my early 20s, I'm a little bit older than you. So I was in the dot-com boom and I started my career starting a startup. My friends and I started a company. I was 19. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing, but we did it. We started a company and sold it and whatever. But I remember going to a big company and I was probably 21. Maybe I was 22, and disagreeing with everything that was going on because it was so corporate. And I'm like, my friends and I could do this stuff so much faster, so much easier. Thinking we knew everything, which we did not. We definitely did not. But we were right about. So I was right about
the ignorance of youth.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And I love seeing it now and being like, I see myself in that person, and I can't get mad at them because I was such the arrogant 24-year-old, 23-year-old. But I do remember that, and so I've always said I can't have a boss anymore because I haven't had a boss in 16, 17 years. But boy, is it bad if I do.
Yeah.
Because I want to be efficient. I want to learn, launch.
Yeah.
And I totally see that, but I don't think I think that's something that is inherent in you as a person, as in us as a
very
person.
much so. Yeah. I think you generally, yeah, I think the one common thing that entrepreneurs share is they generally are bad employees. Um,
Yeah,
uh,
it's a good way of putting
yeah,
it.
I mean, I think the
Succinct.
best entrepreneurs are think they're right and they won't stop until they're proven right, even though they probably weren't right in the beginning. I think you look at that at like Elon Musk, you look at, and I think he is, for lack of whether people like him or not, he is the hallmark of what a great entrepreneur looks like. There's very few people, there's no one who is doing what he's doing at the level and skill he's doing, the tenacity he's doing. So I think when you start it like that, is just saying you take bold things, you take things that everyone's saying you're wrong, and you just don't quit until you prove them wrong.
Don't you think though? Let me ask you this though, because I take a little bit of umbrage with that, because I think at some point that's true, and at some point you have to admit, a person should admit, you know what, this isn't working. Let's look at the data. Let's figure out how can we evolve. How do we? I don't like the word pivot because I don't think one should necessarily pivot, but it's like, how do we evolve this to a place where we are kind of at least trying to get to a point where we're leading users?
I think so, and I'm gonna bastardize the paraphrasing, but Bezos says it bad. Be unrelenting, convicted on the mission, and be loose on the details. Right.
Yeah.
So,
sure.
so what you should never do is the data should always show you the individuals. Like you look at SpaceX, we're going to get to, we think we believe we can deliver cheaper rockets, and we can ultimately be a multiplanetary civilization. He's been unrelenting on that. You look at, Tesla, we're going to build electric cars. He's been unrelenting on that. Now, has he gotten a lot of details wrong along the way? 100%.
Sure.
And I think he would admit that. And I think whether or not he would admit that, we could see factually. So I think that is the thing that I think is like, where I've seen the best founders is they truly believe something needs to exist, and they don't give up on that. Now, to your point, you can't ignore the data along the point. So you can't say that my way is my way or the highway, right? It's right. How do we get there? How do we listen to data? How do we constantly learn? And where I have seen the best is a complete lack of concern of doing a 180, right? So like as a founder being like, we're going to do this. Okay, it doesn't work. Okay, we're going to do this, and never even like apologizing or acknowledging that it's like you learn. So I totally agree with you that like you always have to listen to data. It's that unrelenting passion that you're going to build the thing at the end, right?
Oh, I totally agree with this, but this is where I think that, not yourself clearly, because what you just said, but I think a lot of people who are founders, and I don't even want to use the word entrepreneur because I don't think that's right. I think people who are founders often make the mistake of the lore versus the reality. The lore of, whether Elon Musk or Steve Jobs or whatever, or Bezos, being like, I'm going to make this thing. I'm unrelenting, meaning I'm not going to move my focus. I'm not going to listen to other ideas. Like all those people have listened to people. They've listened to, and they've pivoted. They've done a 180, and they shouldn't apologize. They should be like, I'm doing this because it's the right way to go. But I think we often find with unsuccessful founders is people who who are like, I'm like Steve Jobs. I'm like this person. I have an idea. I don't need research. I don't need data. I just have this idea.
Yeah.
And so often in the startup world, we see those people who just don't understand that, like, yeah, you might have a brilliant idea. Like, who knew in 1996 that selling books online would turn into the richest person in the world? But that guy actually had a journey and didn't do like one thing.
Well, I think the other thing people miss. So I think the entrepreneur has been overly glorified. So let's say this a few different ways. I think people see the success and they don't see all the other things that come with it. So even if you look at a Jeff Bezos or an Elon Musk, I love, and I'll use Elon. I absolutely have a tremendous amount of respect for what he's done. I would never want to be Elon because I know the sacrifice and the pain that he's dealing with to do what he's doing. I think people see like, oh, he's the richest man. I'd want to be that. It's like, well, no, you don't understand what comes with that. I think Jeff Bezos for a long time he's now checked out, but I think the level that those guys went through, the stress, the agony that they went through, I think very few people can actually truly comprehend.
Yeah.
And so I think you see the success they have. You see that they're flying in private jets. You see and you say, okay, I want that. But it's hard to comprehend the level of stress. So I think not everyone should be an entrepreneur. And I also think when you look at those entrepreneurs, and again, Bezos, when you look at, he was working in a hedge fund. He spent a lot of time. He's one of the most so he's working at a highly intense hedge fund. You know, right time, right place to do Amazon, but also the ability to survive was insane. People look at Elon now and they're like, okay, but yeah, he's been this is a third time. By the time he talked to Tesla, he's a third time founder.
Right.
So, and PayPal was so you looking now at like a very seasoned founder. So I just think like it's overly glorified. It's like you look at a lot of things is like, oh, it's easy, you're going to get there. If you look at the success failure rates, the probability is you're not going to get there.
Of course.
The probability is really hard. And to your point, like, starting off with the hubris that you're going to be Elon Musk and because that's what you're watching is like, it's probably a failed philosophy. Right?
Totally agree. Well, so that, which brings us back to kind of like your it's a terrible segue. I'm sorry. It brings back to your trajectory. So
no, I definitely have. I've been able to succeed.
But what I think is interesting is that you eventually leave investment banking. Like you said, you kind of like realize it wasn't for you, and you're in this business that is so, I think ego driven, very, very intelligent. One of the hardest businesses to succeed in. And you're like, you know what I should do? Let me go into the other hardest world to survive in.
Well, so and I think this is a very good example of hubris from a founder. So it's actually a good segue. So I went back to work with my parents.
Why did you leave? Why did you leave? I didn't ask you.
So my dad wanted me to come back. He really wanted he felt like I could help him on the family business. So he built a big business and really wanted help.
And you were done. You were just done.
I didn't think it was going to be a fit for me. I didn't like where I was at for like different things. I love the people. I just didn't see my long-term career.
Yeah.
And then additionally, my bosses were advising me to get out. So when your bosses are saying, don't do this, you don't want to do this. And we've been in here, which I think for many reasons, hindsight, it was a great, but I went back and worked for my dad, had a ton of hubris coming in there, a ton of like, I'm going to show you how to do things. We banged heads nonstop, started a restaurant and really.
Your dad knew banged heads.
What's that?
Your dad knew banged heads?
Yeah. Me and my dad were just
about what?
I mean, just like my dad had done things a long time and built the business himself. And I was coming in and telling him how he was doing everything wrong. And you can imagine I don't know, at the time my dad was 60 something, having a 6-year-old coming in and telling him that every way he's doing it is wrong.
Yeah.
Is like, who are you? And I think me and my dad are very alike. So, and so we just banged heads all the time. Now we had a lot of great success. We did a lot of things, while I was there. Enough success that I was like, hey, I'm kind of going to pivot out. Now, what I do, my parents are so great because even in that, my parents were extremely supportive. And so when we did the restaurant, we did it 50-50 and we did the restaurant together.
What made you, let's talk about the restaurant. What made you start the restaurant? How did you?
So my parents had owned a restaurant forever. It's called The Steak Addict. Still exists. It's the family, and it's really kind of like a honky tonk cool. And I believe that there was an opportunity to kind of franchise this a little and like build another one, the second stakeout, and build it closer to the population. And, my parents generally agreed and were pro it, and we chose a place and they invested, we both invested, and we're 50-50 partners in it. And
where was the new one?
It was a new one. It was,
where was it?
So it was North Tucson. It was a town called Marana, which is really kind of Tucson, but it's just a north part of, Tucson, Arizona. And so we did that. Now, my timing is not always great, but so we launched that in 2008. Right.
Another good economic time.
And it was like, we literally launched it Valentine's Day, 2008. It opened. That was kind of like the economy was starting to turn, but like not that bad. So we had a good start, good first year. The economy really there started kind of turning, and it was just like slowly the business was coming down every year. And so it was one of these situations that, again, everything works on paper. I always tell people like all your ideas work on paper and practice when they don't work. Now, the great thing about that restaurant, and there was a lot of bad things and horrible things, and we ended up getting sued, and me and my dad ended up having $1 million judgment and all these things against us. So all these things that went wrong. But in me trying to save that restaurant, necessity is always the mother of invention, right? And I was trying to save the restaurant. It was just thinking of anything. And I started because I was working so much, and I was working double shifts every day. And I was doing this and back and forth and doing all sorts of different stuff that I was doing on the side as well. And so I started having my chefs just cook, and I was having a hard time. I was now 32-ish, and I was having a hard time staying in shape. And so I had my chefs, basically I was talking to a doctor, and I was like, draw me up a menu of things I should eat. And I gave that to my chefs, and I would just like every day make me to-go kits. And I would just like, if I was there, I would eat it when I was there. And if I was not, if I was at home, wake up and I'd have breakfast. Because I was like, I don't have time to shop, and I don't have time to do any of these things. So I fast forward 60 days later, I'm in the best shape of my life, and I'm working, but it's just all nutrition. And the key was I didn't have to do anything. So people started saying, can you do this for me? And I was like, oh, well, yes. Here's what I'm going to charge. And so we put together the first idea, which ultimately became Freshly, which originally was called F3 Foods. I'm good at doing like a name change in this process.
You know when you're going to change it, you do it.
But really what it was is I solved my problem, which is I wanted to be healthy. I just didn't want to do any of the work, and I needed it to be affordable, and I wanted it to taste great. And what we ended up doing, and I ended up saying, I'll never forget, I'm like, oh, wow, there's something here. Like I've got a bunch of people proactively ask me to do it. So I wrote an email, and I probably had 50 people in Tucson, right? It's not a huge town, but 50 people that I knew close. They were friends, family. And I put up together a Shopify site. This is very early days Shopify. This is 2012 probably. Mm-hmm. I put together a Shopify site. And it was crap. But I basically said, hey, you can buy a week's worth of food. Click the button, buy it. This is healthy food. This is how much weight I've lost, blah, blah, blah. And I send the email out. I go to bed. Next morning, I wake up, there's $2,000 in sales.
Holy shit.
So I'm like, whoa, this is something. So, always the first thing. So I recruited my co-founder at that point.
Nothing works that fast. I maybe it did for you, but you woke up the next day, you have that orders. Then you're like, I'm going to start. You found a co-founder immediately, like
this.
boom, boom?
No. So this literally, nothing was like, it wasn't overnight, but that sales was overnight.
I believe that part of it, but
then I was like, there's something here, right? So we started doing that. Now, immediately what I knew is like, if I was going to do this and build this, I didn't have extra time. So I really needed someone on to help. So I started a process of recruiting my co-founder, who was at the time living in Austin, Texas.
You knew him already?
Yeah. So Carter and I went to the same high school. We'd known each other for a while. And so I was contacting Carter every day saying, dude, and I knew, so I stumbled upon this idea. Carter is a health and fitness nut. Like he's always been a health and fitness nut. He's passionate. His dad was the one who came up with the program. So Dr. Comstock is his dad. So his dad was the one who gave me the food. So, but Carter is truly a fanatic on health and wellness. He has been for a long time. So, and he wanted to do something in health and wellness. So I knew that. And so I was recruiting him. I'm like, you got to come. So it took, I think 2-3 months. He finally jumped over. And when he jumped over, we now had kind of a team, and we were working on it. And we grew the business quickly. It started where we would do, I remember, but this is what like people don't see on this side. So I was running the restaurant. We opened the restaurant at 11, or we opened it for customers at 11.
Yeah.
It ran from 11 to 10:30.
11 a.m. to 10:30 p.m.
11 to 10:30. It was lunch and dinner, right? And on the weekends to 9:30. But
yeah.
So we had a window from 10:30 to when we started prepping, 10 a.m., right? So you had 12 hours in there. So we ultimately had to be in the restaurant at 3 a.m. So we had to be in at 3 a.m. and start cooking, and then be out of the restaurant at 10:30. And so what we would do is, as we process these orders, and we did them twice a week, every Monday and Wednesday, we were in at 3 a.m. And then we ended up recruiting a bunch of insane people who did this. And it was not because of pay. It was just like, they were just, a few of them were restaurant guys. And then we would go do deliveries, and then I would be back in the restaurant at 3 p.m. So I would be back, and then I'd work till 10:30, and then I'd do this rotating. So
Did you sleep?
Yeah. So I'd go home. Now it was rotating. So I'd go to sleep that night, and I'd be back, and because we were Monday, but then it started getting more and more. Very quickly, within 6 months, this business had took out and was surpassing the restaurant. It was now doing more revenue than the restaurant.
Well, so let me ask you, I really want to dive into Freshly stuff in a second, but I want to talk about, because you're still running the restaurant.
Yes.
And, you mentioned before that, like, you guys had like a lot of issues. The restaurant had a lot of issues. Sorry, not that you guys had a lot of issues, but your owners of the restaurant. Yeah. So while you're doing all this, there must be other pressure coming from all the other stuff that that have been going wrong. And I know you kind of glossed over a little bit.
Yes.
And I know how, look, I've had some bars I've opened that have worked. I've had some things that didn't. Like, I know how, and I've had things that worked, but that struggled. And I've had plenty of startups I've worked on that had similar issues. I know that pressure. I know how much it sucks.
Yeah.
And how, like, I know how that stress affects me. I'm just curious, like, before, like, thinking about the day or the months or the weeks before you woke up to those orders, what's going on? What happened? Where are you at mentally with where the restaurant's at, with you and your dad? Like, what is that like?
I mean, so my dad and my mom were tremendously supportive through this thing. My parents, and what I love about my parents is they focus on the problem. They never focus on like why we got here. So it's like, how do we get out of here? Now, the challenge is when restaurants or when the economy turns and there's kind of no easy solution a lot of the times, right? And so the challenge is it tends to be in the restaurant, unfortunately, it tends to be a negative spiral effect, right?
Yeah.
So you cut back on labor, but then when you get busy, the service is bad. That actually ends up leading to negative reviews, which then leads to less rent. So it's this kind of combined thing. So what we were seeing is that like we were cutting back to try to manage very closely to supply, but then we'd have these bursts and different things. So it was kind of this constant kind of negative where the quality was dropping slightly, not intentionally, just because we were trimming back.
Do you see it, or in retrospect, do you see it? You know what I mean? Do you see it at the time?
I think in retrospect, you see it. During it, you're just kind of trying to survive, right? So it is like a survival. Like, you know, I was 100% of my income was coming through this. I had no other, you know, when I started Fresh, I had literally $15 in my bank account. I ended up losing my house. I ended up like, because like there was.
Wait, I'm sorry, you lost your house.
Yeah, I mean, we ended up losing the house because, you know, and again, it was.
Not bring up painful memories. I'm just curious.
In the scope of things, like it was negative. It was very negative. It was negative from credit. Fortunately, I didn't have a family, so it was kind of like I never was homeless for a night or whatever. But ended up having a house that I, you know, in the heydays, I'd way overextended. The mortgage was unsustainable. I ended up couldn't pay. We ended up now in hindsight, we ended up doing a short sale and ended up not being horrible. It could have been a lot worse, but like. Yeah, so you're dealing with those stresses. You're dealing like I can't pay the mortgage. I can't pay these things.
These are the things people don't understand about being a founder. Like you know, these things can turn on not a dime, but they can turn badly.
Yeah, and so like at that time, I was like, what you constantly got to do is like, you know, where I think I was pretty good is like you just keep chugging forward, right? And like you kind of have to get yourself in a mental state every day that like you're going to chug forward.
Yeah.
You can't focus on despair because despair does nothing, right? Like you just got to kind of keep moving forward.
Yeah.
And so from that standpoint is like, I just kept myself in a good mental position. You know, a lot of the things I kind of the other thing I always am a big fan of is like capitulate to the worst outcome and just like acknowledge the worst outcome. So I was like, I'm going to go bankrupt. I'm going to do this. I'm going to have to go get a job. Once I saw that and I got comfortable with that, everything else from there was upside, right? So now it's like, okay, any kind of momentum or anything you get is like, if that's the worst case scenario, which I never ever doubted that like I could go find a job and work for someone or do whatever. So there was always this backslope of like, okay, I've already admitted to that. You know, let it go of your ego and stuff like that. So then you can find things that are working and you can lean into those. I generally always start from a point of like, life is great, have a great time, figure these things out. Like, fortunately, these things are not life and death.
Right.
There's much worse things, and financial things sometimes people make in a life and death, but they're not. And I think when you can set the mindset around that, it frees you, right? Because like fear is paralyzing, and what you really need in these is like you need and you need to get rid of the fear so you can act. You can act with clarity. Now, for us, the clarity ultimately became is that this business was killing it. Now it was early. It wasn't necessarily like making a lot of money. It wasn't making really any money because our expenses were still, but it was very clear that there was a future here. And it was very clear
professionally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was very clear that the restaurant did not have a future.
Yeah. So
So that was the last thing that I had to do, which is like, and that was hard for many aspects, is like acknowledging that there is no savior for this. And so when we did that, extraordinarily painful. We got sued. We lost a ton of money on it. We got all sorts of, because the landlord sued us for all sorts of stuff.
because you're basically shutting down.
We're shutting down. We shut down. There was all sorts of back and forth with like and it was kind of one of these like, everyone's screwed. But the landlord had built, we rented into a whole shopping center. The landlord told us is going to have all these co-tenancy. Well, when the crisis hit, the shopping center never got completed. So there was no traffic. So we were basically saying, well, you left us out in an abandoned, and like, this guy's like, no, your lease, you got to do it. So long story short, went through this whole legal battle. We ended up losing. I don't know if I disagree with it, but or I don't know if I agree, but such
I
is
have
the
a friend
life.
of mine who had a restaurant, same time period here in New York, exact same situation, and lost a lot of money. And it was terrible.
It's horrible, but I mean, this is why my parents are so great. I remember sitting, we lived, it was in a court, which is like a horrible situation to be in. We lose a judgment. One of the juries came up to us after and said that they were instructed because of a technicality that they couldn't go in favor of us because there was a window technicality, but they believed, so that kind of almost made it worse, right? Because they were like,
we wanted to find you.
We believed in you guys. We thought your thing, but we were instructed that because of this. So long story short, I'm sitting on a bench outside the courtroom in Tucson, Arizona, and we just got $1 million judgment. It was just placed on us. So like I have $15 in the bank, and I just got $1 million judgment. So like now I'm net negative,
$990
whatever
$9,000, $985.
I'm losing my house, everything. So, but the positive thing was Freshly was really working. So my dad goes to me, he goes, well, you know how to make $1 million? And I said, I think I can do it. So
that's a ballsy thing to say.
So my dad went to work, and basically he said, how much time do you need to get it? And I said, I think I need 3 years. So he said, okay. So
how long did you have to pay out the $1 million?
Well, right at this way, it was a 180-day judgment, right? So you had to pay it off technically, or you had to file bankruptcy. So my dad said, how long do you need to make it? And I said, I think I need 3 years and I can do it. And he said, okay. So my dad went to work on negotiating the 3 years, and he did a bunch of finagling. My dad got the 3 years. My job was ultimately come up with $1 million. And at this point, again, we built, so Freshly was catching on. We ended up moving the business to Phoenix because we no longer had the restaurant. We moved to another facility. The business just keeps firing, right? So, we're not really making money because we're putting all of our money back into growth. We're growing. We end up getting our Series A financing through a company called...
How did you know how to raise money?
We didn't. The way we raised money, we still laugh at to this day. I mean, we begged from every single person that we could find. I probably sent out, I laugh at like some of these like, founder things. It's like, I got 100 rejections. I was like, I got a minimum 5,000 rejections. We sent out cold emails. We're in Phoenix, Arizona. We sent cold emails to every single VC we found. We sent every angel investor we found. We put on steak dinners where we would, it was like a bad story where we would bring our friends, we would buy steak dinners and we do a sales pitch. And generally they were productive. It cost us, $1,000 for a steak dinner, and we'd raise 25, 50,000. It was just like a constant one of those things. So it was like a bad
It was like a friends and family thing?
Friends and family.
There's no term sheet, there's no valuation, there's nothing.
That was friends and family feeling just like, oh, I feel bad for these guys, right? Like here they are hosting the steak dinner. But we sent a bunch of cold emails. We finally had one, and our cold email was like, we'll send you food, all you have to respond. So this guy says, sure, I'll take the food. Ends up being this guy, Jay Body, here in New York, with a company called Brand Project. So we send Jay the food, and he says, oh, this is pretty good. Right. And so Jay talks the team into basically flying out, and they invest in us. The first institutional money, they put $500,000 into us. Was like,
at that point, what's your revenue?
We were about $1 million, a little under. So we built a real business. We built $1 million. We figured out how to build that.
P&L was
like margin, like almost break even, like just losing a little money, but really investing back into growth.
Yeah.
So they come in, they invest $500,000. And from there, it was kind of like, that was 2015, which is when we ultimately did the name change. We were F3 Foods, which stood for Fresh, Fast, and Fit Foods. Horrible name. I've never been great at branding, but
but you know how to change the name. That's good.
And that was our inflection point. From that point on, we went from doing 1 million, 7 million, 28 million, 75, 350, 550.
How do you? So here's a question I have around, and I've had Blue Apron was a client of mine at one point. I worked on a variety of food-oriented startups. The thing I've always wondered is how you scale that from a inventory standpoint, right? Because like it's when you're in Tucson, you're going to Tucson. But when you're going nationally and doing that many meals and that many states, you must have that many kitchens and that many. How do you figure out how to do that?
That was the funnest part. I look at like our scale from 2015 to 2019 was just insane. And it was getting a bunch of insane people who figured it out. And I tell you that we went through things that we never thought. Like we were originally shipping with dry ice. Why did we switch dry ice? We literally bought out the West Coast on dry ice. The Denver distributor who serviced all of Arizona and Denver literally cut us off and told us that we weren't, because there was no dry ice in the area, because we were now buying 2 tractor trailer loads of dry ice, which doesn't seem like a lot, but I guess dry ice is not like that amazing amount. We just kept figuring it out. And what we would do is just constantly look at who's the person doing the thing that's above us, who's the person that's doing the thing, and then try to go recruit their teams and learn. And we would always get people that were just slightly insane. One of my favorites to this day is our head of operations, Vanessa Lindsay, who is a New Yorker. Vanessa is one of the best, single-handedly the smartest person I know in food, and single-handedly the craziest person I know in food. And Vanessa would do everything. Vanessa, I mean, I'm telling you, I thought I worked hard. Vanessa worked 15 times harder than me. And so just getting people like that in the business who just saw what we were doing and believed in that and would just go crazy to figure things out. And we invented new processes. We invented new things. We were the first company at scale to do prepared meals the way we did. We had the highest standard of food safety across every single person in the industry. We operated to a degree of like our ability to how we did things was like unmatched, which led us to be one of, like, if you compare us versus Blue Apron, even HelloFresh, we raised less than 1/6 of the money that they raised. We scaled faster and exceptionally more profitable. But it was all because we just had a bunch of people who figured it out. So, there was a lot of trials, tribulations, figuring things out. Like to this day, the people on that journey with us, we're all still insanely good friends. And there's a tremendous amount of respect because we had that shared kind of bond. Now, I would say like the number one thing me and my co-founder did is recruit great people who are way smarter in different verticals than us. Keep them excited on the mission, keep them passionate on what we were doing. And then kind of keep them honed in, because they all tended to be a little kind of crazy, but like that's what was awesome about what we built.
What you guys, when did you guys exit? Was it
2020?
Okay.
Yeah.
So when what makes you guys decide that it's time?
It's kind of a combination. I think so. One, I think just like we'd had a ton of success. We'd really built a big business. Nestlé was already an investor on our balance sheet. So they were already an investor. We knew them really well. We had a tremendous amount of respect for Nestlé. And I think, I could have plus and minus on Nestlé, but the one thing I will say consistently is it's great people. The whole Nestlé organization, I've never met anyone at Nestlé that I didn't really love. They're great people. We really grew a true fondness for that team. Now, we had 3 different options when we came to that we had a term sheet that was valuing us at north of $1 billion that was going to do another big slog of money.
Series of D, E?
Series D, I think it was for us. We had an IPO process that was going in stage, so we could have IPO'd or SPAC'd, or de-SPAC'd is technically the word. So we were running all of these processes at the same time. Nestle came in over the top, and we'd known them so well. I think for me personally, the journey as a CEO through that COVID kind of times was very, very insanely stressful.
I can imagine.
It ultimately ended up being a net good for the business, but I think for me personally and for our leadership team, it was like it added 10 took 10 years from our life.
Why for you?
So we were designated a critical,
Sure, you're doing meal delivery.
Delivery. So we were able to operate. We were operating at that point. We had manufacturing facilities in 6 different states. We employed over 2,000 people. There was zero guidance given from any of our regulatory agencies, FDA, USDA, state regulators, health and services. There was zero guidance. Now, we were fortunate that we already operated to the best and nth degree. We're also fortunate, I'll give myself some kudos for this, that I saw COVID coming from China and we massively over-ordered on our protective gear. So we were very well.
How did you see that?
I just, Wall Street Journal fan, I just read this and I was like, this is like, there's zero chance in this day that this isn't coming here. If this is this deadly in China from what we're hearing, it's coming here. And I said, what's the downside? We use protective gear. So I said, just get 3 months on the ballot. Like worst case scenario, I've ordered 3 months. We had to, like, so I just said, order. Like I could be, we were in finance. You saw it coming because the market was already trading that. Right.
Yeah.
And so I just was close to it. We were able to really oversupply in that. That was beneficial. I think the frustrating thing as a CEO is you were kind of at that point, it was like you had, you coming into that, you had the Me Too movement, which was really stressful for CEOs period. And like, we didn't have anything going on. It just was putting this increased stress. Then you had COVID with lack of response. Then you had Black Lives Matters. And at every stage, this was the first time where not doing anything wrong was not enough. You couldn't just like be like, we don't have any Me Too issues. We've never had a Me Too issue. In fact, our culture, it now was like you had to make proactive. And if you weren't, then you were getting judged that you weren't doing. And same thing with kind of Black Lives Matters, which, you know, we were over-indexed on every minority group across the board. And it became that every day was just like another demand, another thing. So I was pretty worn out. By the end of 2020, when we got through and COVID kind of came out, it was the point that like I'd been working 20-hour days every single day, every day. And it wasn't just me. So I'm not just saying this was me. This is my entire leadership team. We had 4 stand-up calls. Our first stand-up was at 6 a.m. every day. 12 people on that call every day, 6 a.m. Our last one was at 10 p.m. And we had 2 in between. And this was going through, we looked at, because again, this is like, you didn't know what's going on. We set up a lot of proactive stuff, but we were doing contact tracing. How do you do contact tracing? Well, like there's no, like, so we're going through, we have the responsibility of 2,000 people that are in our locations every day. And so every day we had to do it. So then the teams that at the last call on 10 was everything we knew there. And then the teams then had to collect information back for the 6 a.m. call. So it was nonstop. It was the same people doing all the same stuff 7 days a week. No, we operate 7 days a week. So this was 7 days a week.
Yeah.
So it's a very long answer to a short question. So at the end of the day, we had the offer to sell, and I was kind of like, this is the right thing for us. I felt like I wanted to kind of take a path under Nestlé and that team, and we sold the business. I think, you know, hindsight, pluses and minuses for sure. You learn through all these experiences. I think one thing we learned is that when you do sell the business, you really are selling the direction of the business. You become an employee again.
Not a great thing for people like yourself and myself.
I think it was hard. I think at the end of the day, I disagreed with the direction of where the Nestlé organization saw the business going. I vocalized that adamantly. I felt like there was opportunities to move differently, but ultimately it wasn't my business anymore.
Right.
I think that was kind of like that's kind of the reality. It's like, it's not mine. I sold it. That was a decision. I got to let others kind of run with things the way they think is fit, even if I disagree. So that was kind of a learning lesson. But I think even in the tough conversations I had with that organization, I generally feel like great people. Like, I think like we disagreed on how to get to X, but like I never had an uncivil conversation. I never had a conversation that was bad.
At what point do you say, you know what, I got to move on? What makes that choice happen?
I think, ultimately, I think there was, and there's some ongoing litigation that's going on, not from me, but through shareholders. So I can't really speak too much to what happened. I think at the end of the day, it was just a lack of alignment on vision and where we were going, and from that. So I'll have to keep it there.
Sure. That's fair. You started the company at $15 in your checking account. You exit. Obviously, it's life-changing. We don't have to talk about numbers. I don't like to get into that. But I do like to ask, like, because I've talked to a lot of people who get to have these experiences that most people in life don't get to have. What mentally, how does that impact you?
Well, I think, so all these things, and this is what I generally always tell people, is like, you always, like, it's kind of like hiking a mountain. And this is the only analogy I can give, is that you hike the mountain, you dream of getting to the peak.
Yeah.
You get to the peak, it's a short victory, right? It feels great for a little while. The key is enjoying the journey. And if you really like hiking, you like hiking not because of the peak, you like hiking for the journey. And so ultimately getting there was both good and bad. It was good in that you finally hit the peak. It was bad in that the peak was not necessarily as extraordinarily rewarding and life-changing as things go. Me and my other founders kind of like, we had opportunities at other stages to get like some liquidity.
Sure. As a lot of people do. Yeah.
And I generally will say like, there are different moments in life that you hit different levels of wealth that really matter. And the first, this is not just me, this is across there. The first thing is you don't care how much something costs when you go out to eat, right? You just don't think about it, right? And generally I would say that's one of the more liberating when you don't worry about, you go out to eat and you know you can afford that meal. Getting to that moment was one of those things that was an absolute freedom that's in. The next one is you're not worried about this month's, this week's paycheck or those things. I will always tell people that the peak is never going to be as good as the journey. And the key in life is like, if you're only looking for the peak and you're slogging through this journey, the peak will not be a big enough reward. The journey, what was fun. So if I look at all this and I said, even if I didn't make $1 off Freshly, would I do it again? Absolutely.
And you are.
The journey was amazing.
And you are doing it.
And I'm doing it again because
Exactly.
I love that journey. And I
You'll
love that.
probably do it
process.
again.
I will likely do some degree of this all my life.
Yeah.
Because it's the people, it's the interaction, it's the craziness, it's the fun like that, and it's a lot of fun.
Agreed. Cheers, my friend.
Cheers. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Story in a Bottle. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review for us in the iTunes store or wherever you listen. I'd like to thank our producers at 1459 Production Management and Charming Robots Eric Bowie for his continued production support.
And of course, I'd like to thank my guest, Mike Wystrach, for graciously giving us his time.